Hi, Julie.
Hi, sorry, it looked like I had joined from my personal account for some reason, but I'm here. My
Nice
mom
to
too.
see
Hi, Mom.
you. Should we start with introductions and then that'll give people a few more minutes to join? You happy to do that?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, so I'll kick off. So I am Chloe O, aka the Divorce and Separation Coach. I'm based in London, as you heard, and my job is to work with people to help them divorce less conflictually. So I work with them to help them diffuse the conflict within their relationship with their spouse, and later on with their ex. I help them with communication, negotiation skills during the divorce, and a lot of people come to me in the post-divorce phase with co-parenting issues, and that's where these kind of the kind of issues we're going to be discussing today usually come up. So I work with people all over the world, but I do specialize in working with expats and international couples. So that's me in a nutshell. Julie, over to you.
All right, my name is Julie Beckerman, and I work with individuals whose exes are pretty difficult. My program is called Co-Parenting with an Impossible Ex, which is pretty self-explanatory. So for those of you who might be co-parenting with someone who is absolutely uninterested in working with you and doing everything in their power to make it more difficult and more challenging, I'm going to have some tips for you. So Chloe and I met through Instagram, and we realized that we kind of have these, some variations. We cover the same things, but in a little bit of a different way, and decided, like, why not? Let's kind of get together and let's talk about some things, specifically some frequently asked questions that come from all of our clients, and then open it up, really informally, just give people some really good information from two different perspectives and give you the opportunity to ask some questions that might be, that you're not able to get answered elsewhere. And so that is why we are here and what we are doing. So if you are co-parenting, whether you are thinking about getting divorced, worrying about what that's going to look like, if you're going through the divorce process, or if you have your papers signed and you're just co-parenting is for life. Or even if you are not divorced and you're just co-parenting and you're struggling with your spouse, these tips are going to apply across the board. So with that in mind, I guess we should get
Yeah.
started.
Yeah, we both gathered a list of typical questions we get, so we're gonna rattle on. If you have any extra questions you want to pop into the chat, go ahead and we'll do our best to answer them as we were saying. If there's other questions or if you want to discuss your specific situation, you can also book a call with either of us, and we'll be more than happy to discuss that with you. Julie, do you want to go first? Did you have a first FAQ
Yeah.
to share?
So I think the first question that we decided would be good to throw out there is like, okay, well, how do you co-parent in the middle of a horrible divorce, right? You don't have your papers signed yet. You're not married. You're not staying together anymore. Things are kind of erupting. What do you do? And so this is a really challenging time. And you need to keep in mind that this is going to be where it's really messy because there is no agreement in place. So for individuals who are, regardless of whether your divorce is going to be high conflict or whether you're going to be able to work things out, this is the time where you're going to see what's going to happen. This is where you kind of set the tone, not only for how you're going to show up, but the way you're going to see the issues that are coming up. So how do you co-parent through this time? You do the best you can and you pay attention. So paying attention to what the issues are going to be so that you can create the best guidelines in your agreement for going forward to protect yourself given what comes up. So that would be my best guidelines or my best advice for what would be most important in this time. The second thing, and I'll probably say this as an answer for a lot of the questions, the best thing that you can do for yourself in the middle of a difficult divorce and anytime really is focus on your self-care. Going through this is going to be hard enough. Going through this with no sleep is like 10 times harder. So anything that you are doing, you need to make sure that you're taking good care of yourself so that you can show up really, really well and effectively through a very challenging experience. So that would be my first tip for you. Chloe, what are your thoughts?
No, I completely agree. I mean, I remember from my own experience and many of my clients, it's a really tense time. As you say, a lot of things are up in the air. It's really stressful. Everyone's emotions, including the children, are riding quite high. Sometimes you're still cohabitating.
Yeah.
So try and see it as a test period. I love what you said, Julie, and I completely agree. learn from this period around some of the things that you're seeing emerge as patterns of behavior that are not working for you, so that you can include that in your parenting plan. So if you notice that, you know, in the time the children are with your ex or your soon to be ex, they are always late for school, for example. That could be something that you can try and specify in the parenting plan, or you can try and address ahead of getting divorced, so that you can avoid it happening going forward. I also think that it's a difficult time because everyone's adjusting. So I think just be patient. Everyone's figuring it out. It's not easy. Some people, some of the parents are stepping into roles they weren't used to having, and it's a bit, you know, it takes time for everybody to feel at ease. And then overall, the dynamic of the couple is shifting, right? You're moving away from a dynamic where you were held together by your love for each other as a couple, to being held together by the shared love you have for your children. So it's a different approach, but you still have that common goal. And I think that's what you have to keep in mind, that you're trying to, both of you, do the best you can for your children. So keep that focus. Just think about where you want to be at the end of the divorce. And if your objective is to negotiate something as easily and as painlessly as possible, well, you know, just kind of maybe keep things afloat and as, you know, conflict free as possible during this period, so that you can then move on with your life. That would be my tips. One thing that I see happen a lot, Julie, is in the phase that's just after the divorce, or just when one of the two parents moves out of the house, and they physically separate and they start having the children, you know, alternating times. Handovers can be a really tricky time. I have a lot of clients who come to me with concerns about, you know, my ex always drops off the children late, or he always forgets, or she always forgets half of the kids' stuff at their house. Or there's some kind of where they come, the children have had dinner just before they come to my house, and I've made dinner. You know, we're not clear about who's feeding them. Handovers are difficult in general. They're also a moment of overlap where you're seeing somebody that you don't necessarily want to be seeing. And you're also, you know, one of the two is leaving their children behind. So it's uncomfortable for them. The children are usually emotional. And especially when you're trying to adjust in the first few months after the divorce, it can be a bit tricky. So I think just be careful of the little things. Those little details around times for handovers, things like that, are worth being clear about. If it is something that is really bothering you, ask yourself why. So, you know, if piggybacking on that example of the late drop off, you know, what is it that's bothering you so much about it? Is it that you're getting nervous that they're just not going to come back, that your ex is not bringing them back? Or is it that it prevents you from doing something else, or that you know, the lack of communication, and you wish they would just let you know that they're running late? Because that will allow you to articulate a clear need to your ex, and to explain what it is that's bothering you, so that you can have a conversation that doesn't happen in front of the kids at handover, but you can choose to have that conversation in a more constructive way, and to find another solution, because we design these arrangements in a bit of a vacuum. We've never tested them at the time where we designed them, the co-parenting plan, and so we have to accept that there will be a degree of flex, and that it will probably change a bit as well as the kids grow up. So I think it's about just making sure that everybody is ready to adapt to make it work better, and to learn from what's working and not. What would be your point on that, Julie, around handovers?
I think the key with handovers, so if you're talking about, right, before the agreement is in place, I think the key piece, what you're saying is, one of the points I wanted to add is, if things are really combative, and while you're sort of getting the final agreement in place, it can be helpful to have a temporary agreement kind of created. The thing to keep in mind with that is sometimes those temporary agreements get held on as the final agreement. So to your point, being mindful that some of these things do need to get tested out, and you want to see how they work. So that is, I think, again, the main benefit of the challenge of going through divorce before you have your divorce finalized is immense. And having support, someone to help you through that, is really important. But the benefit of it is the learning, the ability to make sure that you can really see how things are operating before you kind of sign that, you know, put the ink dries on the paper. And you need to really be paying attention and documenting and getting the right things in place. transitions, how that works, getting that clear. But to also your point, the degree of flexibility that you also have is going to help, because we do need to give things time to work themselves out.
Yeah, I agree. What was your next question, Julie, that you had pulled together?
Yeah, I think the next question we have on the list kind of ties into what you were talking about, which is like, okay, well, let's say you have your agreement in place, or you don't have your agreement, but you've agreed verbally with your ex on, you know, your soon to be ex on the time frames, and they're consistently late, right? They're consistently late. How do you handle this? So Chloe, why don't you start? How would you advise some clients to handle that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was touching upon. You know, is
Yeah.
just being able to discuss it constructively, to try and think about what a better solution would be. What is truly the problem here with them being late, and finding a time to discuss it without the children present,
Yeah.
And to try and find a solution so that you can flex and adapt, or agree that that time is the time that needs to happen, and that the other person just needs to figure out a way of being on time.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. It's right. It's like, just be reasonable. Like, how would you deal with anyone who's consistently late? Like, you just talk about it. So from the perspective of someone who's right, I think there's a difference between someone who just is like not great with time, right? If your ex is someone who's always just not been awesome with time, you need to factor that in. How angry are you going to get at them for being who they are? Versus someone, right, like some of the clients that my clients that I'm working with, whose exes are purposefully doing this. They're doing it because they know it's going to make things difficult for you. And what do you do in those instances? And in those instances, you have a couple of options. So if you need, the first question is, okay, how late are we talking about?
Yeah.
If your ex is 15 minutes late, the courts, they don't, nobody cares, right? Unless, let's say, they're missing a doctor's appointment or they're going late to school, then people are going to start to care. So you have to factor in how late are we talking about, a couple of minutes here and there. If it's hours and you're going hours and you don't know what's happening, then what you need to do is follow Chloe's steps first. You want to start by addressing your ex. Hey, we need to address this. This isn't working, in your nicest possible way, very reasonable. And when they don't listen and they don't adjust the behavior, or they consistently keep doing it, now you're going to just start documenting it. And once you have that documentation, now you can take the next step and get things made, like Chloe was saying. Maybe you need to change the time. However, ultimately, the times this is not something you're going to have a lot of control over. So you want to do what you can do, and then adjust the way you need to, right? Forgetting that it's your ex, you have to just deal with certain things. You know, you take the steps you need to, but certain things, if your ex is 15 minutes late here and there, unfortunately, it's just going to be something you're going to have to suck up.
Yeah.
So I hate to say that about a lot, but unfortunately with difficult exes, that's a lot of the answer. So that's my tips, but I think we have, yeah, that's my tips on the lateness, or the dropping off with the times.
Good.
Yeah.
I think another question we had, Julie, was around, you know, when you have an ex who's bombarding you with messages, you know, emails, phone calls, everything, and just
Right.
really constantly requesting your attention, sometimes for right reasons, to talk about the kids, but it's just too much.
Yeah.
And how do you handle that kind of situation?
Yeah.
Is that the kind of situation you've seen with some of your clients?
Oh my God. So that's my specialty, right? Like, and just to share, my ex is an attorney. So I used to get those messages that were like, oh my gosh, like 20 pages long with legalese, like, and it's frightening sometimes. And one of the things that's important, right, sometimes there are things in there that you need for the kids, but most of the time when you are getting that level of bombardment from your ex, 90% of it is not useful, is not necessary. So how do you handle it? One, you take the steps you would take, like you were saying earlier. You're going to tell your ex, like, you know, hey, look, can you slow down with the emails? The second thing, this is about boundaries, right? So whether your ex is someone who listens or someone who's really, really difficult, you need to set boundaries. By one, I think this is one of your points, Chloe, right, is really funneling the method of communication. So if you're getting texts and emails and phone calls and all this, like, no, we pick one. The second piece of this is, right, so let's say your ex is really, really difficult and they are just nasty, sending you stuff. The key piece here is, just like the dropping off late, you can't control what someone sends out into the universe. You can't control the words they use. Even if your agreement says, don't, don't put these things in the message, the way someone shows up in a message is they're going to do it.
Yeah.
You can control how you respond and whether you block certain things or the degree to which you respond to them. So how do we deal with it? We deal with it with boundaries, and the right boundaries based on the situation. If you have a very explosive ex, you may not set such harsh boundaries right away because that could be scary. I wanted to say something else, but I'm blanking, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's all about boundaries, but I think that there's a lot of really good apps out there. There's one called Our Family Wizard in particular that a lot of people use that allow the communication to happen through one defined channel. And on top of that, it's all recorded, right? So there's proof and evidence of what's being said. So usually people behave a bit better and communicate a bit nicer when it's through
in theory. But I have a really funny example, right? So in terms of messages, right, how to handle it, we don't handle the other person when it comes to handling messages. We handle how we respond to them and the degree or the time frames with which we respond, or the way in which we respond, or the things we actually respond to or not. Because you can't control this. So even if you have something in your agreement that legislates and says exactly how you're allowed to communicate with each other, you still really can't control it. And here's the example I have. I have a client who has so many rules around how they're allowed to communicate with their ex. One of the rules is they can only have 3 sentences in their communication.
Oh, wow.
But you would think that would limit the amount of nonsense that goes on. But what happens is now instead of 3 sentences, you have 3 very long run-on paragraphs with run-on sentences, and there's just lots of commas instead of periods. So even though you have all these rules, and that particular client has somebody monitoring their account, they still can't control it. So you have to keep in mind what is in my control, and you are who is in your control. Setting up boundaries around communication, limiting the amount of interaction is going to be key. If your ex is really difficult and really volatile and does not like it when you say no, or doesn't like it if you block messages and it's going to escalate, I want you to call me because I can help you set those boundaries in incremental ways so that it feels safer.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you need to, it's quite key to inform the other person that those are the boundaries you're putting in place. From now on, I will only answer messages you send me on WhatsApp. I will not answer messages that are insulting. Whatever boundaries you set, let them know so that they also understand the rules of the game and where you're setting your limits really around how to interact. Going forward.
Yeah, you want to communicate that, and you want to, we call it CYA. You got to cover your ass sometimes, and you have to have that documented, especially if your ex is extra difficult, because they're going to look for ways to catch you and show that you're not doing what you're supposed to. So you want to make sure you're following those rules.
And even when they're not difficult, I mean, I tend to work in contexts where people actually are trying to do things even without doing it on purpose. I mean, I've done it myself. I had that situation with my ex where I was sending him messages as things were happening throughout the week. And at some point he said, enough, I can't deal with your message. And so we agreed to have a weekly call where we would just have that, set time. And we talk about, any decisions. Do we re-enroll her in ballet? What's happening with the teacher that was not being nice to them? And we just catch up on how the kids are doing and discuss all those logistical matters, but in one set context that works. So I think there's a lot of different ways of doing it, depending on the context, depending on how people prefer to work.
I think what you said is so important. It's like, because I work in the space of people who are just so contentious, right? Even when you're contentious and it's like really high conflict, you always want to make the first step under the assumption that you can do this. Right? Like reach out to them, be reasonable, try it. You can assume, right? They may not work with you, but you want to take that step because people do things not intentionally. Things just happen. People are people, and we want to give that benefit of the doubt as well.
I agree. And kind of
especially in this environment where it's so potentially,
I agree. I was going to piggyback on that a little bit, with the next question, which was around, different parenting styles. When you're co-parenting, there's always, we always anyway have different parenting styles in a couple. But once you separate, the other person's parenting style might be more irritating to you. And sometimes they also indulge in it a bit more because they know they don't or they're not accountable to you anymore and they can do whatever they want. But it is hard to handle when your ex doesn't do things the way you would like them to do it, and the way with the standards that you set for yourself, in terms of how you want to feed your children, anything like dress.
Bedtimes,
Exactly.
right?
And I think this is unfortunately a little bit of one of those where you have to accept, they're, by definition, they're going to be spending time with their other parent, and that is outside of your sphere of control. And so you have to accept that you're not going to be able to make sure that they get the exact same, rules and ways of being parented, at your ex's house. So that's something that you have to come to terms with. But I think that with that in mind, it's worth thinking about what are things that are really important to you. I usually work through these kind of issues with my clients by thinking about their priorities. So there could be things like education, hygiene, I don't know, whatever it is that is top priority for you, that you're going to agree with yourself. Those are things, if issues come up relating to those items, I'm going to have that conversation. Everything else, I'm going to just bite my tongue and let it go. And actually, research shows that it's actually good for kids to be exposed to different parenting styles. So it's, if it works differently at mommy's or at daddy's, it doesn't matter. It's just going to be different as long as it's safe, and as long as both parents are doing their best to raise the children, as best they can. There's no harm to the children in having different sets of rules, different ways of doing things in both households. I think you just have to think about what are the things that are deal breakers. So, it could be alcohol, for example. You don't want your ex to drink in front of the kids, that kind of thing. If that comes up, if you hear of that happening, that's going to be a battle you're going to have, and you're going to choose to address it. But you can't go to your ex for every little thing they do that doesn't align to how you would have done it, because that's just not the nature of your relationship anymore at this stage. And I think another thing that we had discussed, Julie, was when you have a parent who's buying the children the world, and the other parent who can't really follow, and how that creates a bit of tension, in that for the parent who can't follow, it feels like, oh well, I can't take them on fancy holidays and go to Disneyland every weekend. And how do I, how are they going to love me less? How do I handle that? And I think that's tricky, because there's an unfairness at the center of that dynamic. But at the end of the day, kids are clever. They love the parent who gives them safety and security. They don't care about all the material stuff. It's nice, it's great for them to get, but that doesn't really make a difference in how they perceive their parents. And actually, it's, if you think of it in their interests, it's quite nice for them. Let them enjoy it. They're going to get to go to Disneyland every weekend. Great. Yeah. Have a good time. And if it was coming from, their grandparents or someone else than your ex, you probably would be happy for them. So, but what would be your advice on that?
I think you nailed it in terms of, right, like when your ex seems to be able to buy your kids the world, it's like, okay, well, how can I compete with that? And I think that's the point. You're not competing. And I think of this as like, in a business, or in like, you go to a store, like you don't need two women's departments. You need a women's department, a men's department, a kids department, or whatever. Like, your kids don't need you to have the same kind and offer the same things. You offer your own valuable things that have nothing to do with money. There was a quote that I love that I think ties in, is like, kids go where there's excitement, but they stay where there's love.
Yeah.
So, give your love in whatever way you can, and that's going to translate. I think the other thing that you said too about the two different households, like I think of it as two, like if, kids grow up with two different religions, that happens all the time. It's not better or worse. It's just different, and giving them perspectives. This takes a little work, because there's some things that happen in the other house that in your view really feel wrong, really feel unsafe. Like, for example, your ex maybe gets them McDonald's or lets them stay up super late on a school night. Like, you might really feel like that's not right, or not good for them. And there's no support. Like, you can't really mandate that. And that's hard. That's challenging. So checking your own beliefs, and recognizing that you may just disagree. And it still doesn't mean that what they're doing is wrong any more than it means that what you're doing is wrong. It's just different. And that's huge. And I think the third piece you said, so I'll just piggyback on this, is picking your battles. And when it comes to someone who's really, right, where you have a rapport, you can collaborate, you can talk, You pick the battles that are important
Yeah.
to you. When you're dealing with someone who is impossible, and it's not a matter of, right, what you have to pick the battles that you can get support on, that the system, the court system will back you on. Because if you're trying to fight something that everyone's going like, we don't care, you're kind of wasting
Sure.
your energy. So that's what I would say about managing the differences.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and to your point too, I think whether you're in a divorce or a marriage, like there's always differences, and how do kids
Yeah.
reconcile that?
Yeah.
So
I think
yeah,
when you're still married, there tends to be a bit more goodwill in trying to meet the other one in the middle. That's
yeah,
usually the main
yeah.
difference. What was your next question, Julie? I think it was
I was just looking at that. Oh, so the next one is, and this can happen with some of these issues when, right, when your ex is always putting the kids in the middle,
oh yeah,
right? So, and this can happen with times, right? Like if drop-off times change and now your kids are like worrying about the schedule and all these kinds of things, or, if, so the main thing, if your kids are getting put in the middle, if your kids are coming to you and saying, well, mom or dad said this and you're saying this, your job is not to get into the story of, oh, well, he said this and no, I said this and I don't know why she said, because that's not why your kid, like the story, it's not for your kids. Your job is to calm the emotions and get your kids out of it.
yeah,
So the way that you do that is you acknowledge, wow, that must have been really uncomfortable. You seem really upset about that. I don't want you to worry about it. It's going to be fine. Your dad and I are going to work it out. You go play. And it depends on the age of the kid, but like really getting on their level and letting them know it's understand, right? It's going to be okay. We've got this. You don't worry
yeah,
about it. And don't get into the details. That is the biggest issue that I see is parents get into the story with their kids.
yeah.
And then you're like arguing about what he said, she said, best you can. And that's easier said than done, but if that's something you're struggling with, I can help you with that. So yeah, what
Yeah.
about you? What do you think about
I,
when kids are getting put in the middle?
I know I agree 100% with what you were saying. I think this is where you want to be clear about your own values. You don't want to enter the other person's game, and your value is around your children being happy and feeling comfortable and safe and secure. And so not engaging in that whole game of saying, oh, well, she said that or he said that, and that's not true. And it's absolutely not unuseful. Keep adult conversations for the adults without the children. The children do not need to know about the conversations you're having with your ex. You're having those as parents, and they then impact the children, but the children are not part of that conversation. But being clear about who you want to be. Who do you want to be as a parent? Do you want to be the person who does, that kind of nasty thing that puts the children really ill at ease? Or do you want to be a parent who is protecting their children's feelings and helping them through this transition? And when you engage, when you mirror the other person's behavior and start playing their game, you let go of who you are and you start playing along according to their rules. And so that person is defining how you're behaving. Do you really want to give
Absolutely.
your ex
I feel like I
that
could
power?
absolutely
Not the
100%.
way you
That's
want to be living.
It's not about tit for tat. It's about understanding what's important to you, who you are, the kind of person you want to be, and standing in that power regardless of the nonsense or whatever that comes around you. I love that. Yeah. Someone had a
Yeah,
question,
I saw a
Claire. I don't know if you
very
wanted
long
to.
question come up, but I couldn't read it in time.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
trying to
how
take
do
a
you deal
look.
with an ex who used the courts and legal threats
Hmm.
to make you comply with their demands? If I say not and can't accommodate, I get threats of court and threats of being sued. That's
Hmm.
probably one more for you, Julie, in
Yeah,
terms of the.
that's a challenging one. Again, my ex is an attorney, so I really, really relate to that question. And I think the go-to phrase that I have is we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? We don't back down from what is right for our kids because of some threat. Now, I understand that, again, that is way easier said than done, and getting sued and going to court is like, right? And so getting very clear and creative around that. But ultimately, your bottom line is threats or whatever. Your kids come first. And if somebody was threatening you and your kid was in harm, would you ever not protect them? No, of course you're going to. So if someone's threatening you and trying to prevent you from doing what's best for your kid, you got to get angry. And you got not scared, because scared is going to back you down. You got to start getting, no way. You don't get to take me off of myself as a parent and make me someone different. I am someone who stands up for my kid. You want to sue me? Go ahead. That kind of feeling. And again, way easier said than done. You need a strategy. You don't want to just go into it blindly, but that's the mindset. And I hope that helps. I don't know if you have any other questions. And if you're struggling with it, please call me. I can definitely help you through that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about getting the right advice on how to handle those kind of situations, and journaling. Keep track of everything that happens. If you think it's going to end up in court, keep a track of all the incidents that are happening, dates,
Mm-hmm.
times, what happened, and if you have some kind of evidence of it, that's even better. I think that's just in terms of being cautious and preparing yourself in case there is some kind of.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, if your ex wants to play in court, you just got to get better at it. Be better, be smarter, know more of how it works. So their threats become whatever. Threaten me. I'm doing what's right. The court's going to stand behind me.
Yeah,
Right? That's
yeah,
that's the position you want to be in. Go ahead. Good luck to you. You want to threaten me? I'm doing
yeah.
what's right. Let them see. Right? And that's the attitude. If you're worried that maybe you're not going to win because you're not, then you want to make sure that your argument's solid, right? That you're in a good position here, and then they can threaten you all they want.
Yeah, a lot of the work that I do around conflict de-escalation is exactly that. How do you try and set things right again and change the dynamic?
Mhm.
And even though there's nothing you can do to control the other person's behavior, you are still half of the conversation. And so there's things you can do to influence the way you're communicating, to influence the interactions you're having. And things like boundaries we discussed earlier, but there's a lot of other things you can do to help you bring down the tension, try and get the other person to speak to you rather than just send out threats. Because usually if people are sending out threats, is that they feel threatened themselves. They're defensive. So trying to understand what the underlying issues are can really help to try and meet them halfway and find a solution.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder, right? Again, right, just as a reminder to everyone, we're coming from different sides, right? Chloe's clients are more collaborative, working more together. My clients are in pretty nasty tension. So right, this advice is for people who are really, really struggling. And it's always good to remember, you don't always have to jump to that conflict. We can try to de-escalate first, and we
Yeah,
always should try.
yeah.
So I think that's really
Agreed.
crucial.
And sometimes, some of my clients, sometimes their spouse isn't that amicable, but there's an intent or a real resolve on the part of one of the two to make it happen amicably. And I think there is a lot that can be done in that context. Not everything, but there's a lot you can do to improve things.
Okay.
There was another question that I have that comes up a lot. I mean, I think probably more for me than for you, Julie, but with people who are in international couples or expats, they do at some time find themselves in long distance co-parenting relationships. And it could be just a few hours drive, or it could be a whole other country or the other end of the planet. But that's a tricky situation that often occurs and that people really struggle with, because they're trying to make sure that the children don't lose a parent, that the parent who is far away is still involved. And they want to do their best, but it also feels very much to the parent who has the children most of the time like they're doing all the work, which they kind of are in practice.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there can be a lot of resentment around that feeling of being the only one dealing with all the day-to-day stuff, and having all the responsibilities. But then on the flip side, the person who's away can feel very excluded and out of the loop. And because they're physically far away, they have less access to information, less access to their children. And so I think, again, when there is that goodwill on both sides, there's a lot that can be done using technology to make sure that the kids can speak to their parent, even though they're far away.
Yeah.
You can just set up a Zoom call and read to the child. I don't know, depending on the age, but you can play chess online. You can play tic-tac-toe, using any app, with a whiteboard. Just spending that kind of casual time, and as the parent who has the children, facilitating that, making sure that you put the technology in place, that if the kids don't know how to use it, you set them up, arranging a time that works in their schedule for them to have that kind of virtual visitation with your ex. All of that can really help in terms of creating that or maintaining that relationship and that contact. And I think also, again, a lot of responsibility for the parent who has the children most of the time, but trying to make sure that you allow the other parent to be part of their day-to-day life as much as possible. So for example, when you have parent-teacher meetings, when you have doctor's appointments, try and see if you can do it at a time where the other person can join and they can dial in, and they can be part of the conversation. They can just be up to date on what's going on in the kids' lives. Even though they're not physically there, they still feel involved. And I think that's what we're trying to deal with, is that sense for the other parent of being involved, and that sense from the children, therefore, that both of their parents care and both of their parents are part of their day-to-day life,
Yeah.
even if they're not physically there. Have you ever had that kind of situation with any clients?
I think this is like, this is right your area, the expat thing. But I think what I'm hearing you say, it's like you can get creative when the willingness is there. And I guess what would come to mind for me is if you're in that situation and there's, you know, in the conflict side of it, I think, you know, it's not the parent's responsibility, you as the parent's responsibility to make sure your ex stays involved in your children's lives. It is your responsibility to keep that opening so that when and the ways in which they're able to connect. And an interesting thought just came up to me, like there are ways of keeping the other parent present in your space, even when they're not there. So, you know, just by talking about them, oh, you should call your dad about that. They would love to hear it. Or, oh, there's a funny story about me and your mom from years ago. Let me share that with you. And bringing that other parent and like little, you know, just details about them into the day so that it's not like so sliced and diced.
Sure.
Like it's allowed in a little bit, you know. So I think that's what comes to mind for me.
I like that. I had a client the other day who was saying something along the lines of, I try and say one good thing about my ex every day to my kids. And
Right.
just saying it's really hard.
Sometimes
but
it's really hard.
But just like having one kind word every day for their ex. And it could be, you know, oh, your dad makes really good pasta or whatever it might be.
Right? They're really, really good sense of humor. I think the key thing too, and if you're dealing with someone who's really nasty, your ex is like, and you're like, there's not a chance I can think of anything nice. Think of it this way. When you say something nice about your ex, what you're doing is creating a space for your child that feels more comfortable being around you because you are sending out some positivity. So ultimately, saying something nice about your ex makes it nicer for you to be around. Yeah. And that's the goal there. So I think creating positivity and good environment, even if your ex is like the biggest douche, you know, ever, sorry for saying that, like biggest jerk, you know, ever. Like you can still make it positive for your kids to have that connection. Yeah, right? You don't have to love your ex for you to create a connection with your child and your ex.
I agree. And I think it gives the kids permission also to love the other one and to not feel that they have to.
That's it. You have to give them that space. Otherwise, they're not going to feel comfortable being around you. If you make them shut down parts of themselves around you, you are putting the block between your relationship with your kids.
Spot on.
So really important to stay positive.
Piggyback on your point earlier, Julie, around, you know, I completely agree. It is not your responsibility to make sure your ex is involved or to make them feel involved, but it is your responsibility to do what's best for your children. Yes. And having both parents involved is what's best for your children.
Right.
So that's your loyalty. Your loyalty is not to your ex. Your loyalty is to your kids. Right. It's just that sometimes it means doing the right thing for your ex. Which doesn't always feel great, but if you keep the focus on the kids, it helps.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the more creative, right, and again, right, you can get creative. It sounds like from what you're saying, there's so many ways now to stay connected when, you know, if people are open to it. So, yeah.
I think we were going to finish the call with sharing 3 tips each. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to bring up before we do that.
No, I'm happy to do the 3 tips. All right. So my first tip, and I said this earlier in the call, and this is like not that sexy, it's not that interesting, but it is like the most important. And you have to, if you are going through this, you have to take care of yourself. And I mean the basics: what you eat, sleep, exercise, water intake. If you do not, you are not putting yourself in a position to be able to manage these things. If your ex is challenging and you're getting messages and emails and phone calls and they're nasty and you think you can handle that and you haven't slept, like, I'm sorry, that's going to just be really challenging. So self-care is key. That is my first step. Second is you need to focus your mindset on what's going to be effective for your kids. This is not about fair. It's not about, oh, they did this and they never help me and they don't contribute and they don't do. I'm sorry, like that's just the way it is and it sucks and I get that, but it's about what's going to be effective and making the decisions that work for your kids, not what's going to be fair. That's just not a useful concept. And then the third piece is about expectations, right? And this you kind of touched on, like, as things are changing and, our expectations for how it should be and how our ex and should be showing up or how this should all look or how it should work, like that's just going to leave you really, really frustrated. The more you can release your expectations and just deal with what it is, the much more peaceful it's going to be for you. So those are my 3 tips. And obviously, again, all easier said than done, but they are all achievable things. And, if anyone is struggling, like, please reach out to me or Chloe. We have ways of helping you get much more control over this.
Yeah.
If you're in court, if you're dealing with legal things, like, please reach out to me. I can definitely help you with that.
Happy to help as well.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, I think I'll piggyback a little bit on your last point in that I think the point I made earlier around choosing your battles is really key. I mean, the point of divorce is to not have to deal with the other all the time. And if you are constantly in conflict with them, what was it all for, right? So try to be clear with yourself what you're going to be willing to step up to the plate for and what you're going to let go of. And unfortunately, there are things you have to let go of. I remember my father once telling me that's what happens when that's what comes along with the privilege of having children. You have wonderful children to take care of. It means that you have to co-parent, and in this case with somebody that you're no longer in love with and that you don't necessarily like, but you still have to co-parent with them, and your peace of mind is worth a lot more than winning any kind of hypothetical battle with your ex. So that would be my first point. My second would be to communicate, and that's something that I go on and on about, but it is so important to speak to each other. Doesn't mean you're friends, doesn't mean you're going to go out, and have a drink on a Friday night. It just means you're talking about what matters to you guys in common, which is the kids. You don't have to share anything about your personal life. It's not, an opportunity for the other one to know all about what you're up to. It's really for you guys to collaborate so that your children have a team of parents working for their well-being. So speaking to each other, I think, is key. And then my last tip is also not very sexy, but it's important, is having a really robust parenting plan. I think the more you can think long-term in your parenting plan, try and anticipate future situations. If your kids are small, what's going to happen, in terms of schools and stuff like that, but try to have something that's defined. People often shy away from that because they feel like, oh, it's too restrictive and we're going to start negotiating over tiny little bits. I can guarantee that 95% of the arguments you have with your ex after divorce are about those little details. Mm-hmm. They are about those little things you didn't document. And having that parenting plan gives you a fallback position. It doesn't mean that you don't ever flex, that you don't ever adapt based on the circumstances. It means that if you can't agree in a specific context on how to handle a situation, there is a fallback. There is a clearly defined course of approach that you have both signed up to. Mm-hmm. So do spend the time really making that parenting plan as robust as you can. Learn from the experience of that limbo period we started with around, before you get divorced, what kind of behaviors you're starting to see happen. If it's the drinking, well, maybe put a clause in the parenting plan that they can't drink when they have the kids. Think about what are the things that are going to potentially become problematic and set some rules around that so that everybody's clear on the rules of the game. Is there anything else, Julie, that you wanted to add before?
I think what you said was great. I think, that parenting plan, especially right if you're dealing with someone who's high conflict, you want to have it in there. That's your go-to. Yeah. Keeping right. And so, yeah, those key tips, I think they were great, what you said. And I think that's it. Did we have any other questions or anything else?
I didn't see anything else go through. Let me scroll real quick. We had a couple follow-ups from Rebecca, but I think we addressed those. I think that's it. I mean, if any of you have any questions, as I said at the start, I offer a free discovery call. You can ring me up and we can have that chat. You can reach out to Julie as well. And we're more than happy to guide you through. It's a difficult time. There is no perfect answer, and there is no science to this. Everybody's trying to figure it out. We have the benefit of our own experience and the experience of our clients, and to know what are the common mistakes to avoid, and how can you do things better. And that's what we're trying to share with you guys. So feel free to reach out.
Yes, please reach out. Any questions, contact either one of us. And it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you all for joining. We have a recording of this, so we will share that as well. And I hope you all enjoyed it, and looking forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you so much, Julie.
Okay, bye, Chloe.
Bye.
Thank you.